I'm Amber Bell and this is Real Agriculture. I'm here today with Kelly Turkington and he's going to be giving us a stripe rust update as we're moving into the growing season. So welcome Kelly, it's great to see you.
Great to see you, Amber. It's nice to be out in the field today.
It sure is. Okay, so stripe rust, what are growers looking at this year in the West?
Actually, so far a bit of good news. With stripe rust, typically the issue comes out of the States. So in terms of Alberta, it's primarily the Pacific Northwest, so Washington State, Oregon, and northwestern Idaho. And then central Saskatchewan into Manitoba is typically that Texas to Nebraska corridor. And this year, the stripe rust and leaf rust issues in the States are much less than last year. Last year in 2024, they started to show up quite early in the States, which meant there was more of a risk for the Prairie region. This year, it's a pretty light epidemic so far, but it's something that you'd want to keep an eye on, especially if you're growing a variety of winter wheat or spring wheat or another class of wheat that is susceptible to stripe rust.
Right. So any recommendations how often growers should be out there scouting? What should they be looking for?
Well, a couple of things. So I'm involved with the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network, and usually in about mid-May through to the start of July, we put out weekly rust risk forecasts for prairie producers. So we look at the epidemics in the States. Do we have epidemics of concern that could provide a source of rust spores that blow up into the Prairie region? We look at wind trajectories and whether we've had trajectories that bring those spores up. Then we look at weather conditions and crop growth stage and issues those forecasts. So that's one thing growers can follow. But when they're out in the field, scouting, have a look at what's there. And unfortunately with the rusts, they can appear out of nowhere and develop quite rapidly. So if it's something that you're not routinely out in your field scouting, you may unfortunately miss it, at least at a stage where you could put a fungicide on and get a really high level of control. So the risk forecasts that the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network provides is really just a heads up for growers and consultants to identify regions where there may be an emerging stripe rust or leaf rust problem and where they're encouraged to scout. And typically the rule of thumb is about 5% of the leaves affected or 5% of the area of the leaves affected. That's sort of a bit of a threshold, but if you're starting to see stripe rust early, a fungicide will be important, even at that herbicide timing, because fungicides tend to be much more effective against rusts versus some of the other leaf spots like tan spot or septoria complex or net blotch scald or spot blotch in barley.
Right, and you mentioned off camera that in the east some of the stripe rust overwintered. Is that fairly typical? What do growers need to think of with that?
It's certainly an interesting observation. They've noted it here over the last 2 weeks in Ontario. They had a big epidemic in 2024. And yes, if you have stripe rust moving into your winter wheat field in the fall and establishing on that winter wheat field, and then if the winter is mild, so you get good snow cover, good insulation, and the temperatures are not overly cold, that stripe rust can overwinter. And we've seen it in central Alberta in research plots and in commercial fields. In mid-April, we saw active stripe rust starting to develop. So that was about 2015, I think. So certainly if you have winter wheat and you notice stripe rust in the fall and there's been an epidemic in the spring wheat crop that previous summer, I would be back out into that winter wheat field as soon as it's starting to regrow. See if you're seeing symptoms, and if you are, hit it with a fungicide. And then after about 3 weeks, you might actually have to go back in again and look at topping that fungicide up.
And should growers be going to report any stripe rust findings that they're seeing, or how does that work?
Absolutely. That's part of the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network is the network of people. That involves researchers, extension staff, individual farmers, crop consultants. If they see some things, let us know, because then we can provide that information sort of broadly across the Prairie region. So it's just a heads up that things are starting to occur, because the summer's busy, and if you're a consultant and you have a number of clients, depending on what's happening, you may be run off your feet. So a little bit of a heads up regarding emerging issues might mean that you transition to scouting for leaf diseases, let's say, versus insects or weeds.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And that was Kelly Turkington on Real Agriculture.